Just stop for a second before you keep moving, because the fact that you landed on these words today might mean more than you think. This was not just a random piece of content that floated across your screen at the wrong time. Something in you may have already been quietly reaching for exactly this, and somehow it found you anyway. So give me a few minutes of your time. Bring that person to mind right now. Let their face come into focus. And then simply notice what moves inside you the moment it does. That soft ache, that complicated mix of warmth and longing and something you cannot quite find a name for. That is not confusion. That is your heart already recognizing something your mind is still working to catch up with. Because this person did not stumble into your life carelessly. On a level that sits beneath reason and logic, something in you feels like it already knows them. And I understand how exhausting that becomes to carry when everything around it feels so unresolved. All those nights lying awake with it pressing quietly against your chest, wondering if what you are sensing is real, wondering if any of it will ever lead somewhere. It will lead somewhere. It is already leading somewhere. You are not being foolish. You are not being overly sensitive or blowing things out of proportion. You are standing in the middle of something that has the genuine potential to change who you are. And that is exactly the reason it feels this difficult right now. What makes these kinds of connections feel so consuming is that they do not stay politely on the surface. They reach directly into the places you have spent years carefully protecting, the parts of yourself you have learned to manage, keep hidden, or simply not examine too closely. Most people grow up imagining that love is supposed to arrive as relief, like finally reaching still water after years of exhausting effort just to stay afloat. But the connections that actually transform a person rarely feel like relief at first. They tend to arrive more like a disruption, like something being shaken loose inside you before anything new can take its place. All of those old coping habits, emotional walls, layers of pride and fear and survival instinct, they all get rattled. And in the beginning, that does not feel like progress. It feels like something is simply breaking down. When someone enters your life and reaches a place that no one else has ever been able to access, your usual defenses stop holding up the way they always have. The person who has spent years giving too much starts feeling the weight of all that giving. They start questioning why they came to believe that closeness had to be earned through constant effort, endless patience, and the repeated sacrifice of their own needs and desires. That realization can be genuinely painful because it means confronting something uncomfortable, the possibility that somewhere along the way they were taught that love had to be won rather than simply received. And at the very same time, the other person may be facing something just as frightening on their end. Someone who learned to survive by keeping emotional distance. Someone whose whole system came to associate real intimacy with old pain, with betrayal, with disappointment, with the particular kind of loss that comes from opening yourself up and finding out it was not safe to do so. They do not pull away because the connection is unimportant. They pull away because the feelings become larger than they know how to hold. Because closeness itself became threatening long before you ever came along. From the outside, it can appear almost frustratingly simple. One person leaning forward, the other stepping back. But beneath that surface, what is actually happening is usually two people responding to the exact same fear from completely opposite directions. Both of them carrying the wound of rejection. Both of them afraid of not being enough, just expressing it in entirely different ways. The one who keeps reaching forward may carry the deep belief that if they stop trying, the love will simply vanish. But at some point they will need to learn that dissolving themselves entirely is too costly. Their worth is not measured by how much they can endure, how long they can wait, how much they are willing to sacrifice, or how completely they can neglect their own needs in order to hold someone close. The one who keeps stepping back often carries the quiet, unexamined belief that allowing someone fully in will mean losing themselves, or letting that person down, or ending up somewhere they cannot escape from. So the moment things begin to feel genuinely real, they instinctively create space. But that space almost never brings the relief they were searching for. More often, it delivers guilt, a creeping loneliness, and an awareness that grows louder rather than quieter about how much they actually feel. Healing is not a clean process, especially at the beginning. It can look like inconsistency, like long silences, like emotional overwhelm and decisions that make very little sense from the outside while someone is still trying to find their footing inside themselves. Growth almost always looks like a mess before it starts to look like something wise. The caterpillar does not gently evolve inside the cocoon. It completely dissolves before anything new can form. Transformation has always required something to end first. Not a literal death, but the ending of old versions of yourself. Old defenses, old beliefs, old ways of protecting yourself that cannot survive inside something deeper and more real. That is why these kinds of connections can feel so unbearable at certain moments. They hold up a mirror to the contradictions living inside you. They show you how desperately you crave closeness while also revealing how frightened of it you actually are. They force you to feel the difference between attachment and genuine love. Attachment is the part of you that says, "Please do not leave me because I need you to fill something that is missing inside me." Genuine love is the part that eventually grows into something steadier. The part that says, "I want to fully meet you while also learning how to stay whole within myself at the same time." That shift, when it comes, changes everything about how a connection feels. But there is one piece of this journey that most people completely overlook. In every connection like this, there comes a turning point. And it almost never arrives through some dramatic confrontation or a long-anticipated conversation. It does not happen because they finally say the thing you have been holding your breath waiting to hear. It happens because of a quiet internal decision you make entirely within yourself. The decision to stop waiting to be chosen and to start genuinely choosing yourself instead. When that shift takes place, the entire energy of the dynamic begins to move differently. Not because love operates through some mysterious force, but because what you bring into a connection genuinely matters. When you stop reaching towards someone from a place of fear or need or quiet desperation, you stop being something that their nervous system instinctively wants to move away from. For maybe the first time, they are left alone with what they actually feel about you. Not what they fear, not what they have been avoiding, not what they have been filling their days with distractions to escape from, but what genuinely lives inside them when there is nothing left to hide behind. And what lives there may never have gone anywhere at all. I want you to trust something that is easy to forget when you are in the middle of all of this. Everything you have moved through during this period of waiting has meant something. Every single part of it. None of it has been wasted, even in the moments when it felt entirely pointless. Even when you looked back at everything you gave and wondered whether it just disappeared, whether it reached anyone, whether any of it was worth what it cost you. Love does not just evaporate. It does not simply dissolve into nothing and leave no trace behind. Every quiet night you spent carrying someone in your thoughts when they were not beside you. Every morning you woke up with unspoken feelings still pressing against the inside of your chest. All of it has been shaping you in ways you may not be able to fully see yet. That love is still real. It has been expanding something in you, deepening your capacity, making more room inside you for something truly extraordinary when it finally arrives with enough space to breathe. When you cry over something that feels so deeply right and yet causes so much pain at the same time, that is not evidence that you are fragile. Those tears almost always come from a heart that refuses to let go of something it recognizes as genuinely worth holding on to. They are the mark of a rare kind of emotional courage and loyalty. Most people, when uncertainty stretches on this long, start building walls. They start looking for reasons to protect themselves before anything else can get through. You had every right to do exactly that. No one would have questioned it. Closing yourself off would have made complete sense. But you did not. You stayed open when shutting down was right there as the easier option. You kept your heart available when hardening it was entirely within reach. In a world that constantly rewards emotional distance and guarded self-protective behavior, that choice was not a sign of weakness. It was a form of courage that a lot of people never manage to develop because they stop trusting before they ever get to find out what might have been possible. To love someone deeply without constantly calculating what you are getting back in return is genuinely rare. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of love that becomes the actual foundation of something lasting. You kept showing up emotionally even when everything around you seemed to be pointing toward the exit. You stayed present through confusion, through distance, through long stretches where nothing felt certain and silence seemed to stretch on endlessly. And to do all of that without becoming bitter, without turning resentful, without closing off and becoming someone harder than you were before, that requires something that cannot be manufactured or learned from the outside. It comes from somewhere deep inside a person. It is either there or it is not. And in you, it is clearly there. That is not a minor detail about who you are. That might actually be one of the most defining things about you. And it is precisely that quality that is steering you quietly and steadily towards something genuine, not toward a relationship that keeps you permanently unsettled, not toward a connection where you are always trying to decode what is being left unsaid or figure out where you actually stand. You are not moving toward a future where uncertainty is your permanent companion. You are moving towards something that fits, something that does not require you to make yourself quieter or smaller or less than what you actually are. A connection that feels natural rather than draining. A love that finally feels like exhaling after holding tension inside your chest for far too long. That is not wishful thinking. That is a real destination. But getting there depends on a choice, on what you actually do starting from now. So what does that look like in practice? The answer is both simpler and harder than most people expect. You deliberately turn your attention back toward yourself, not as a tactic, not as a performance designed to spark a reaction or make someone miss you or send any kind of signal. You genuinely begin bringing your energy back to where it belongs. You start redirecting the emotional investment that has been pouring outward, and you give some of it back to your own life instead. You start asking yourself a question that maybe you have not asked honestly in a very long time. What do I actually need right now? Not what do they need, not what could I do differently to change things, not what would finally make them understand or open up or come back. What do you need? What would feel genuinely nourishing to you today? What parts of your own life have been waiting quietly on the side while the majority of your focus stayed fixed on something uncertain and just slightly out of reach? You begin filling those spaces again. You start giving yourself at least some of the same energy and enthusiasm you have been so freely offering to everyone else. The things you put on hold because life did not feel settled enough to enjoy them. You begin going back to them. The experiences you kept delaying because your heart was occupied somewhere else. You let yourself have them. The friendships that quietly drifted to the edges while your emotional attention was absorbed in another direction. You start finding your way back to some of those people, the parts of yourself that have been sitting patiently waiting for you to return. You bring them back into your daily life. None of this means pretending the feelings are no longer there. None of it requires you to erase what you carry or convince yourself that something real was actually nothing. You do not have to force yourself to stop caring. This is simply about expanding the perimeter of your life again, making sure your entire world is not resting on one person and one possible outcome. Remembering that your life is bigger than any single chapter, no matter how consuming that chapter has felt. And when you genuinely start doing this, something quiet begins to shift. It does not happen dramatically. It does not announce itself. Most people do not even notice it happening at first, but it is real. You stop feeling like a sentence that someone else needs to finish. You stop experiencing your own life as though it is suspended in a waiting room. You stop believing that everything meaningful has to stay frozen until one particular situation finally resolves itself. Instead, you start feeling whole again, like someone whose life contains real movement and color and purpose, regardless of where any one relationship currently stands. Grounded in your own existence rather than hanging emotionally from someone else's uncertainty. And that groundedness changes how you show up in every room you walk into. People sense it even when they cannot put words to what they are noticing. There is something unmistakable about a person who is genuinely at home inside themselves. It creates a quiet confidence, a kind of ease and settled strength, a natural magnetism that has nothing to do with effort and cannot be faked or performed. Real magnetism does not reach outward in desperation. It simply draws things toward it by existing fully. And the person you have been loving through all of this will feel that shift too. Probably more clearly than anyone else in your life. Not because it is a strategy designed to manufacture a specific response. You do not need another strategy. This is simply what happens when someone stops showing up from a place of emptiness and starts showing up from a place of genuine fullness. The whole connection changes texture. Room opens up for something real to finally breathe that simply could not exist before. There is one more thing worth holding on to here. That person is not the villain in this story. I know there have been moments when the pain made it tempting to frame things that way. When the silence, or the distance, or the inconsistency made it easier to sort everything into a clean story where one person was clearly right and the other was clearly wrong. But people are almost never that uncomplicated. They are not cold. They are not indifferent to you. What you have been experiencing as distance is usually something far more layered than it appears. Many people learned long before they ever encountered you that love was something to be cautious around. That closeness was connected to loss or pain or the particular kind of disappointment that comes from trusting someone and finding out that trust was not safe. That belief was not a conscious choice. Nobody chooses to become afraid of the thing they most want. It gets woven into them through experiences that happened before they had the language to even understand what was occurring. It became part of their protection. So what you are seeing as withdrawal is almost always someone managing a fear that has lived inside them for years, sometimes decades. They think about you in the quiet moments between distractions. When the noise settles and there is nothing left to redirect their attention with, you are there. They feel your absence even during the periods when they were the ones who created the distance in the first place. There is something unresolved inside them about you that does not fade just because contact becomes less frequent, because what they feel has nothing to do with physical proximity. It runs much deeper than that. And that unresolved work is not yours to complete on their behalf. You cannot do it for them, no matter how clearly you see what they need or how much love you have available to offer. That journey belongs entirely to them. The most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to let their fears become a measurement of your worth. Refuse to absorb their unhealed wounds as evidence that something in you is lacking. Their struggle is theirs. Their healing is theirs. And your value stays completely intact regardless of where they currently are on that path. Carry yourself with such genuine dignity and steady self-respect that when they finally work through whatever has been keeping them stuck, what they find on the other side is you at your absolute best. Not diminished by all the waiting, not hollowed out by all the longing, not still searching for validation that should have been coming from you all along, but someone standing quietly and fully in their own light, grounded, complete, genuinely ready for what comes next. Close your eyes for just a moment and picture a morning that may be closer than you currently believe. You wake up, and the first thing you become aware of is that the weight has lifted. That specific heaviness that has been living in your chest for so long that you almost stopped registering it as something separate from yourself. That steady, low-grade pressure, that ache that sat just beneath everything, simply gone. Not because the feelings disappeared, not because you stopped caring about this person or forced yourself into some kind of emotional numbness. None of that. The weight is gone because the love finally has somewhere real and solid to live. Because what felt unresolved for so long has finally resolved itself. Because the thing that always seemed to exist only as a future possibility is now simply part of your actual life. Imagine turning toward this person and really seeing their face, not glancing, not hoping, actually seeing them, and noticing something there that either has never been fully present before or has been missing for longer than you can clearly remember. The hesitation is gone. There is no conflict quietly running beneath the surface of their expression. No trace of that familiar look that belongs to someone who is physically present but holding some essential part of themselves carefully at a distance. What you see instead is peace. not the kind that announces itself. A quiet, deeply settled peace that belongs to someone who made a real and complete choice and stopped second-guessing it. Someone who is not managing what they feel or keeping anything carefully held in reserve. Just someone who is fully, entirely there with you. Imagine what it would feel like to love someone and have that love sit gently in your mind at 2 in the morning as a source of warmth instead of anxiety. A love that does not keep you awake, running through conversations, looking for what you missed, or wondering what you should have said differently. Imagine a love where your nervous system is finally allowed to rest, where you are not constantly scanning for signals or quietly bracing yourself for the next wave of uncertainty, where disappointment is no longer something you are permanently prepared for. Imagine what it feels like when the question of whether you are enough stops arising altogether, not because you finally proved your value through enough patience and effort, not because you convinced someone of your worth over a long and exhausting period of time, but because you are sharing your life with someone who simply never questioned it, someone who sees you fully, all the layers, the confident parts and the complicated parts, the things you are proud of and the things you are still working through, and who chooses all of it. Not in spite of those things, because of them. That is not a comforting fantasy. That is the natural result of two people who both genuinely committed to their own healing. Two people who stopped arriving carrying old damage and quietly expecting the other person to repair it. Two people who took real responsibility for their own growth, spent genuine time understanding themselves, and arrived at something real because they were actually ready to receive it. Do not let the hardness of this middle chapter convince you that the destination was never real. The middle is deceptive like that. It has a way of pressing in on you from all sides, making everything feel narrower than it truly is. It does not offer the comfort of beginnings, where hope is still fresh and imagination fills in the gaps. And it does not offer the clarity of endings, where everything finally settles into understanding, even if that understanding is painful. The middle sits in between those two states, and in that in-between space, perception becomes distorted. This is the part of any meaningful emotional journey where uncertainty becomes loud, where questions multiply faster than answers, where silence feels heavier than intention, where effort begins to feel invisible because results are not yet formed. And because human beings naturally look for meaning in patterns, the absence of clarity can start to feel like a sign that something is wrong or that nothing is unfolding at all. But the middle is not a verdict. It is a process. It is the part of the story where everything is still developing beneath the surface, even when nothing obvious seems to be happening on the outside. Think of it like being in a long tunnel. In the beginning, you remember the entrance clearly. You know how you got here. You can still feel the energy of stepping in. But as you move deeper, the light behind you fades, and the light ahead is not yet visible. That is the point where most people begin to question whether there is an exit at all. Not because the exit disappeared. You remember what it felt like when things were aligned, when communication was clearer, when emotional signals were easier to read, and you compare that memory to the present moment where everything feels more fragmented. That comparison can create a quiet kind of grief. Not because the connection is gone, but because it is not currently accessible in the same way. And grief, even subtle grief, can distort perception. It can make temporary distance feel permanent. It can make silence feel like conclusion. It can make delay feel like denial. But none of those interpretations are necessarily true. They are emotional responses to uncertainty, not confirmations of reality. The middle tests something very specific within a person. It tests whether they can hold meaning without immediate validation, whether they can remember depth without constant reinforcement, whether they can stay grounded in what they know internally while external circumstances are still unfolding. And this is where many people unintentionally misread the experience. They assume that if clarity is not present now, it may never come. But most processes of emotional development are not immediate. They require time not only for external events to unfold, but for internal understanding to mature as well. People change slowly. Awareness grows gradually. Emotional readiness develops unevenly. And connection, especially the kind that involves vulnerability, does not always progress in a smooth, predictable rhythm. So the middle often feels like contradiction. Something real is sensed, but not fully confirmed. Something meaningful is experienced, but not consistently expressed. Something important is felt, but not yet stabilized. And in that contradiction, doubt tries to take control of interpretation. But doubt is not always an accurate narrator. It often speaks the loudest in moments where clarity has not yet arrived. It fills silence with assumptions. It replaces waiting with conclusions. It tries to protect you from uncertainty by convincing you that uncertainty itself is the answer. But uncertainty is not an answer. It is a phase, a transitional space between what has been felt and what is still becoming. This is why the middle deserves a different kind of patience. Not blind patience that ignores your needs, but grounded patience that understands timing is not always aligned with emotional readiness. Because what is being formed in the background is not always visible in the foreground. People can be processing internally while appearing distant externally. They can be struggling to understand their own emotions while giving very little outward indication of that struggle. They can be present in feeling but inconsistent in expression. And for someone on the receiving end, that inconsistency can feel like loss. But it is not always loss. Sometimes it is simply incompletion. The destination still exists in many of these journeys. But it is not reached through forcing clarity in the middle. It is reached through allowing processes to unfold without prematurely defining them as finished. And perhaps the most important shift in perspective is this. The difficulty you feel in the middle is not proof that nothing meaningful is there. It is proof that you are still moving through something that has not yet revealed its final shape. Because the middle is not where things end. It is where things are still becoming.